section 3. So section 3 is about the state of affairs. So this is talking what's happening in the political sphere. So let's start with some political history. This is a graph showing the rise in CO2 in the atmosphere. It started way back here in 1957 when US scientists decided to track CO2 levels in the atmosphere. They thought it might be interesting, something might be happening in that area, so started to record. And since 1957, every single year, the levels of CO2 in the atmosphere have increased. 1990, 33 years later, the IPCC that we've mentioned a number of times had their first meeting, and they produced a paper and warned that radical measures were needed to be taken to keep temperatures below +1 degree. This is 30 years ago. This is before I was born. The scientists warned that we need to take measures to keep it below 1 degree because they said it was essential to avoid the risk of societal collapse. If it stayed at 1 degree extra, we've only just reached 1 degree and we can see some terrible things starting to happen. If it stays at this temperature, they said there's a risk of societal collapse. That was in 1990, 30 years ago. 1997, the Kyoto meeting, legally binding agreement to reduce emissions. 2001, 4 years later, the USA withdrew. They renounced the Kyoto Protocol. George W. Bush was worried that it would be bad for the economy. 2006, the Stern Review said the economic consequences of not tackling climate change far exceed those of tackling it immediately. The US government said that it was an excellent report, and CO2 levels continued to rise. 2016, we have the Paris Agreement. 170 countries signed to say we must limit global warming to less than 2 degrees, aiming for 1.5 degrees. 2 degrees is far too bad. And CO2 levels continued to rise. The next year, the USA withdrew from the Paris Agreement. The year after, CO2 levels continued to rise by an even faster rate, 2.7%. Since the 1990 report, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere has increased more than all of human history before. Now in 2020, still no major industrial country is on track for less than 2 degrees C. How about the UK government? The UK government stated that we've made 42% reductions in our carbon emissions since 1990. In these numbers, they didn't include aviation or imports. Why wouldn't we include aviation and imports? Because our aviation is huge and we no longer make things like we used to. We mainly import goods. This is ridiculous. This is kind of similar to the guilt I was talking about before. Just try and say that we're doing good things. No actual intention to do it. There's no love in this. It's just trying to cover up. So we can go, no, we're doing good. We're doing good. Those words don't matter. What people think of us doesn't matter. What we actually do is what matters. The UK has the biggest fossil fuel subsidies in the whole of the European Union. We subsidise £10.5 billion a year in the fossil fuel industry. We declared a climate emergency, but we're seemingly doing very little. We've shown we can act in emergency now with the code of emergency, but we're not. We've shown we can make those far-reaching, rapid, unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. We're choosing not to. We're choosing mainly to do nothing. We're in a climate emergency, but our own Prime Minister didn't even turn up for the climate debates, the election. It's renowned that we are holding the global meeting, and frankly, we will be embarrassed by how little we're doing. It's shocking. When you look at the actual figures and not the statements they're making of 42%. And in the COVID crisis, the Bank of England gave loans of £11.4 billion to high carbon companies. 56% of all their COVID bailout money went to airlines and oil, gas and chemical companies. This is investing in the problem. This is locking in terrible amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere by our own investment. Our own governmental advisors, the chief scientific advisor for the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs said we should prepare for a 4 degrees increase. So David King, the government's former chief scientific advisor, agreed with their statements and said if we get to 4 degrees rise, it's quite possible that we would begin to see runaway increase. They've also made many other statements of the breakdown that will happen at anywhere near this level. But yet still, we should be preparing for 4 degrees. That's their statements. They're not ignorant in this. We signed the Paris Agreement. We got the report from the IPCC. Our government isn't ignorant of this. It is knowingly sacrificing the next generation. This is a professor of statistics and sociology from the University of Washington, modeling the likelihood of actual change that will be made. He says that their analysis showed that the goal of 2 degrees is very much a best case scenario. The thing that would cause 500 million people in poverty, they say that is the best case. They're saying there's a 1% chance that we'll actually manage to keep it below 1.5 degrees. A 5% chance that we'll be able to keep it below 2 degrees. On average, the model put out that it will be about 3.2 degrees C. This, if you recall from earlier, the National Academy of Statistics categorized as catastrophic. They say there's even a 10% chance that it will be greater than or equal to 5 degrees. 5 degrees. That is completely unknown. That's implying beyond catastrophic, including existential threats to human existence. So the likely range is between about 2 and 4.9 degrees C. And that's within the lifetime of children alive today. That's not a distant future prediction. That's within this century. This is Dr. Kate Marble, climate scientist at NASA. She stating that to be a climate scientist is to be an active participant in a slow motion horror story. Seeing what is going to happen, finding out before anybody else does, and watching the world not listen, not act, just walk straight into it. She says, as a climate scientist, I'm offered to talk about hope because audience want to be told, everything's going to be all right in the end. The organizers always say climate change is bleak. Tell us a happy story. Give us some hope. And she says, the problem is, I don't have any hope. I'll give you another minute to process that with God.